Huh? Is this a question? Oh, yes.
For me, it started before I was going to elementary school, which just so happened to be right by the main line for CSX. As a boy growing up in the early 90s, for some reason, just watching a train go by was the most enthralling experience ever, just by the nature of the sounds they made, how everything around us seemed to vibrate, and trying to guess what all those cars were carrying. Then I got to reading and studying them and how they worked, and became fascinated by the history and science of them, which helped my understanding of why they're important to us. To my knowledge, no one in my family tree was a railroader, so it just sort of came to me spontaneously. In the farthest reaches of my memory, there were two possibilities. Nashville once had a theme park called Opryland, which had its little narrow-gauge loop of track for train rides. 3 locomotives were rostered, with 2 of them technically converted to diesel power on the inside, leaving the only live steam engine there, a 244T Forney type known simply as Rachel. The window for me and the family to visit would have been incredibly small between my birth year in 1993 and the park's closing in 1997. So I have no way of verifying if it was her or one of the other steam outline types. The other possibility was at the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum in Chattanooga, with 280 Consolidation number 610 on the Missionary Ridge Local. That would have been 1996 thereabouts.
You mean steamers and diesels, right? Well, each has their own strengths and weaknesses. Steam has great public appeal, and they're probably the best way to get introduced to the industry. But diesels are more efficient, more economical, and sometimes can look just as stylish. So, it goes either way for me. What, I can only pick one? I already tried that once and came up with like 30 railroads that I equally like, and those are just the ones in the United States. New York Central Hudson. Next. NC&StL 576. Childhood hero, last of her kind, and privileged to be helping with her restoration. The K-Class Mountains. So by biggest impact, I'm guessing you mean the one that's not just changed my opinion of the engine, but also made me rethink life in a totally different way. In that case, it would be Union Pacific 4014. Yeah, I was one of the lucky ones to follow that engine on its first run from Cheyenne to Ogden back in May. Visually, here's how the thought process went.
Look at that. In all sides of this lad. Absolute unit.
So basically, it's a stretched out Challenger. Still pretty neat, I guess. Ugh, gotta get this shot in without any people in it. This is hard enough getting the whole engine at this. Oh my god, this thing is huge!
I thought like that radiator smell was maybe something to do with coolant, like in the water, the steam itself, to like keep it.
No, they put chemicals in it so it doesn't corrode the metal, but
Right.
that's basically the gist of it.
Huh. Cool.
Oh my god, what have we gotten ourselves into? You know, I'm kinda glad that I got to skip graduation to see this. Okay, I'm really glad I got to skip graduation to see this. I am really glad I skipped graduation for this. I am so glad that I got to skip. Oh my god, yes! Happy National Train Day! You know, the big boy's a good engine. When it came to dieselization, railroads were largely going with the flow of what diesels could do at that time. Since diesel power was first perfected on passenger service, the steam engines assigned to those trains were the first to get bumped down the totem pole. Because they were built for hauling light loads at high speeds and really no other type of work, they were retired and scrapped much sooner than the freight hauling engines. Those that were streamlined just had fancy sheet metal work that got in the way of their maintenance, and most of them had already shed their cowling long before retirement. Well, both of them were a terrible loss to the preservation industry. As for which one would be the best fit in today's world, I'm inclined to side with 5629 because, as a Pacific, I think it would fit in better with today's business model with excursions, especially with being able to travel regionals and short lines. Unfortunately, what's done is done, and we already have other locomotives that are still here and are in dire need of our help.
New York Central J1E. What else? NC&StL Pacific 535 and the Southern Pacific MT4. Well, yeah, anyone can restore a steam engine if they truly wanted to. They just need three things: a place to run it, both with a willing and supportive operator and track that can support the engine, enough financial support to pay for the teardown, the rebuilding, the reassembly, and continued operation of the engine, not to mention the liability insurance, and enough manpower to support the heavy lifting, the book balancing, and the public outreach. I mean, once you got all these three things taken care of, then yeah, knock yourself out. Just don't do that while you're on duty though, or you might get the group sued, and nobody wants that. It's already been chosen. I'm okay with it.
Based on what I've heard from people who have operated 722, she's a good engine, and I think she will look marvelous if she's restored to operation.
Favorite vintage type would be the Alco PA. Favorite modern type would be the General Electric ES44AC. Yay, I guess. I mean, some of those are already gone, so like, business as usual. I'm indifferent. None of the above. Oh man, there's so many of them now. I'd say it would probably be a tie between Iowa Interstate 513 and Pan Am Railways 52. I mean, I know the other one doesn't count anymore, but I still think it looks cool. If they want to do it, great. If not, then I'm not bothered. Oof, oh man, that's like asking how many subscribers do I want to lose. Well, if I had to pick, I'd personally go with
Sure, the aesthetics aren't perfect, and I have heard how high maintenance they can be if they're not treated right, but the more I see them in revenue service, the more I see them proving their worth. It's been almost 20 years since we've had a new passenger locomotive built for intercity service, and it's being done by a builder that's relatively new to the locomotive market. In that sense, the Charger has become a poster child, not just for current Amtrak lines, but also for independent startups outside of the network, like Brightline and the Northern Lights Express. As someone who's naturally optimistic, I hope the best for them. That's not to say that the F-59 PHI has lost its cool. Far from it. They've served the industry well for 20 years, and if their recent purchase by Metra is anything to go by, they still have lots of life left in them. I look forward to seeing what's in store for them too.
I mean, they interchange with each other in Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver, so yes?
For the longest time, it was the Saratoga and North Creek, which was operated by Iowa Pacific Holdings between 2011 and 2018. The scenery in the Adirondack Mountains was unbeatable. It diversified revenue sources by catering to passengers and freight, or as much freight as they could negotiate with CP being run by Ethan or Harrison, and they tried their best to go above and beyond with paying homage to the region they served. Suffice to say, it was a good effort.
Good question. Actually, I might do that for a future video editorial, like I did with the new river train. Does anybody want to see that?
Well, in terms of consistency, photogenic scenery, and leaving a positive impact for communities along its route, my vote would probably be for the Pacific Surfliner. This is an example of corridor rail service done right, blossoming from 3 trains a day when they started in 1971 to 12 today. It's remarkable to see what the service has become. Aside from NSPS and TCRM, because I'm with both organizations, the best ones I've been to include, but aren't limited to, TVRM, Monticello Railroad Museum, Heber Valley, Cumbres and Toltec, and Nevada Northern. These places perfectly show off railroading's heritage in the best possible light, they go to great lengths to make the train relevant in their community, and they left me with the lust to keep coming back for more on each of my visits. I hope to be able to discover more places like them in the future. Hopefully in a few years, that will be NC&StL 576. Until then, engines I love getting to see over and over include Southern Railway's 154, 630, and 4501, any of the Grambling tanks, and Nickel Plate 765, with ambition of seeing more of Union Pacific's 844, 3985, and 4014, and Southern Pacific 4449 in the future. There's no particular order from greatest to least, but it's safe to assume that 576 will take the number 1 spot when she joins us. The Laurentian, operated by the Delaware and Hudson between New York City and Montreal. Although it's operated most of its life with steam and old heavyweight cars, the upgrade it got using former Santa Fe PAs and ex-Rio Grande lightweight cars seemed a little out of character for the D&H. In 1967, most railroads were trying to get out of the passenger rail business, and yet here was the D&H, with new equipment making a splash of color, taking a stand in what they believed in. Although the train was discontinued on Amtrak Day, the equipment itself would remain in service on the Adirondack until 1977. Now that is a tough one, seeing how with today's national network the way it is, it would have to benefit the area it serves and not get chewed out by competition, like being a target for mergers. The one that comes to mind to me the most is called the Blue Ridge Railroad, which began construction in the 1850s with the ambition of connecting Anderson, South Carolina with Knoxville, Tennessee, on a route to the mountains that was straighter and leveler than the loops taken by the Southern or the Clinchfield. Because of financial difficulties, though, only about 30 miles was ever built.
Probably the 1920s and 40s. Most of my favorite things in railroading are from that time period, and I like other things from that era, like the music and fashion.
Logically, the best era in railroading is right now. Why? Because everything else in life is better now than when it was yesterday, particularly after the breakthroughs we've had in medicine, health, job productivity, etc. For railroads, I mean, I'll admit that I'm not that familiar with precision scheduled railroading and how that's changing the industry, but I will say that my heart aches for the jobs in business being lost. What I do know is that I wouldn't want to be stuck in the dark ages of breathing in coal soot and asbestos lagging every day, working irregular hours to the point of exhaustion, and living in fear of getting crushed by a train that derails while sitting still. Now, if you're talking about actual work on a train, the best thing to do is sign up as a volunteer at your local railroad museum. You can do just about anything you're comfortable with, like showing visitors around the place and explaining the significance of artifact or rolling stock, or working with other members in restoring or creating something that visitors will enjoy. Now, some railroads, like Strasburg, have moved on from using volunteer labor and now depend on paid employees to show up and work. Then the process is basically like applying for a job, complete with an orientation, an interview, and maybe FRA certification if that's applicable. But from there, the work ethic should still be about the same. I tend to side with Canadian National because of things like their paint schemes, locomotive designs, and their stance on passenger rail with things like the turbo. That being said, I absolutely adore the Royal Hudsons and their slightly elder sibling, the Empress, and think that the story of CPR's construction is mandatory reading for anyone interested in rail history.
Now fortunately, this one I can narrow down, the London Midland Scottish. Sure, I got favorites from each and every continent. In South America, the narrow gauge moguls exported from Baldwin. From Europe, the Duke of Gloucester, Deltic, Eurostar, SNCF 231, Crocodile, and the X2000. From Africa, the 15F, Red Devil, and the Meyer Garrett. From Asia, the Chinese SY, Japanese C62, and the Zero Series Shinkansen. And from Australia, the Victorian Railway Hudsons, and the New South Wales Government Railways Silver City Comet.
Easily, the British Isles tops that list because it's railroading's birthplace, among other reasons just mentioned. Being an avid watcher of Top Gear over the years has also influenced my travel buzz to check out railroads in the Nordic countries like Sweden and Norway, the Alps, the French Riviera, and the Italian lakes.
I used to. Right now I'm just waiting for the opportunity to build a new one. Oh, gauge, because everyone knows that the amount of fun you have with model railroading is directly proportional to the amount of rails on the track.
Nothing particularly set in stone as long as I don't have a layout, so whenever I operate at any of the layout clubs that I'm with, I tend to go with things that fit the era or locale they operate in. As a result, my collection dates as far back as the 1920s right up to today. If you're short on materials, get creative with it. If you know where to research, you can learn how to make buildings and structures with scrap materials just laying around the house. You can also join a club or an online forum that's populated with people who have been in the hobby for their entire lives that can show you a thing or two about how things work. Most important, remember that this hobby is built around having fun. Because it's entirely your creation, you're the one in charge of how it works, even if it's just easy track on the bedroom carpet.
The first one they made in 2001. I've been in this business a long time.
As someone who's tried other simulators on the market, Trains with a Z is probably the most user-friendly game I've used, and it lends itself the greatest of the filmmaking work that I do. If the next version of the game has some sort of terrain-forming capabilities like Planet Coaster, and an actual skybox that simulates night and day, I think we'd be set. I mean, Trains with a Z is perfect for video making, because they have the ability of getting angles and shots that I couldn't get in real life, whereas most layouts I'm able to operate on are at the whim of other operators, technical faults, or a lack of climate control. The latter especially blows in the summer, when the climate makes being outside insufferable. But watching videos of other people's layouts, especially ones that are highly detailed, are very enticing for me to try and replicate. I'm not sure when I'll be able to achieve that goal, but one day. Trains A New Era is my mainstay because it's what I'm most familiar with. TRS-19 also has some great effects and user interface going for it, but some of the features got rearranged and I'm still trying to find them. I've been editing videos with trains since I was 11 years old. When I was 13, I discovered YouTube itself through the official forums of the Trains game. On it was a channel called Ron the Cyborg, who was showing off videos he did of his model railroad and TRS 2006. Like any pubescent tween at that time, I thought I could do the same thing. Sony Vegas has been my mainstay tool, with GIMP for graphic design and SoundForge for audio work. It was about mid to late 2007 when I first came up with the idea. I spent most of that year trying to perfect it, then spent most of 2008 preparing the episodes in advance before it officially premiered in August of 2008. If I had to pick, I did actually pen a few story outlines for a potential reboot of The Full Buccaneers. It varied over the years, and at one point involved the HO scale NC&StL layout. Logically, in the interest of following historical accuracy, the basic premise would be turned on its side a little. You see, while the SP and UP did have their differences and sometimes headbutted each other during the 40s and 50s, they really had one common enemy, the Santa Fe. So the story arc would have revolved around the SP and ATSF being all-out enemies, and UP assuming the role of Westpac and being an observer and sometimes the pacifier in certain scenarios. Based on all I've learned about railroading since then, I think it would have been quite something to see. I mean, if anyone out there wants to actually use that premise, go ahead.
The ones I especially liked being in were The Full Buccaneers and the BMR. Good writing, good talent, and an overall pleasant experience. Yes, he's working with me and John on our crossover between San Juan Branch Line and Marysville, and he's also voice actor for me in Full Steam Ahead. I wouldn't mind.
Yes, but a couple things need to happen first. I need to find material outside of the public domain and gain permission to use them for commercial purposes, which sometimes involves royalties. You could probably see that when I was discussing the UP steam electric turbines, and how I only showed 3 pictures when we all know there's more pictures and even color film available of them in action. But I couldn't track down the original owners or copyright holders to obtain permission, so this was all I had to work with. The other thing I need are people to interview. People who know steam and diesel technology inside and out, and go into detail about how and why these events happened the way they did. The grand plan for that show would have been a feature-length documentary covering the entire locomotive industry between 1934 and 1960, and how steam and diesel power competed against one another. That segment, covering 1939, was uploaded merely to gauge interest in whether or not people would want to help me with such a huge endeavor. Don't base the plot of the story entirely around content itself. Have the stories driven by character development, complete with flaws and talents to make them interesting. The more research you do on the real thing, the better. Don't let certain things be a barrier, because they might work out as an advantage. Most important, don't be afraid to innovate. Because as much as some people will always favor memes, tropes, puns, and running jokes, there are just as many people out there who enjoy something fresh, thought-provoking, and relatable.
Clockwork Angels by Rush. Just to be clear, it's the title track and not the whole album, although that's quite good too. Marvel is not an area of expertise, but I did come away from the first 2 Iron Mans and the first Captain America feeling good about them. I don't really feel the need for one. The San Juan Branch Line server is enough for me to manage.
If the person in question is able to prove themselves or forgiving themselves for their past faults and become a better person, yes. If all they're doing is verbally beating themselves up, no. Well, they've all had their ups and downs, but the most consistent thing for me has been a positive impact that helps me keep getting further and further in life. So with that in mind, 2019 has been the high note to end this decade on. Traveling to both sides of the country, seeing almost 20 operating steam engines in that time span, and discovering new things about the world that I could use to benefit myself has been very fulfilling.
Well, what do you think?
Uh-oh. That sounds like the questions about San Juan! Let's do San Juan Q&A some other time.